Hi, my name is Tim Kellers. I'm the instructor and the author of the iOS and the Android developer program here at NJIT. We're just kind of waiting to see if we have a few more people to attend, and we'll get started in a minute. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, if you have a microphone, you can go ahead and ask them, or if you want to type them into the group chat panel over on the side of the Google Hangout, I can answer those questions there. Okay, well, I think we're going to begin anyway. The iOS and Android development classes both begin on September the 23rd, coming up, and they both cover the introduction plus to developing iOS and Android applications. The iOS program requires that you have a Macintosh, and the Macintosh should be able to run the new operating system Lion with the second operating system Lion, 10.7 or above. You can run Mountain Lion too. If you have the opportunity to get Mountain Lion before the class starts or during the class, you can do that. That will allow you to go further beyond the class. As Apple releases new software, they release it compatibility with one or two releases of the older operating system. So moving forward, if you can move up to Mountain Lion at this point, you're probably good for the development environment for, it's hard to say, but usually about a year is what Apple has. You're also required to have an iOS device. That means a 4th generation iPod Touch, an iPhone 3GS, 4 or 4S or 5, or any one of the iPads currently. As time moves on and we get to things which are iOS 6 specific, it'll require an iPad 2 or the new iPad or the iPad mini. iOS 6 is not supported on the original iPad. For the Android developer class, the requirements aren't quite as strict because Android is a little bit more platform agnostic when it comes to doing development. Android can be developed on a Linux platform, it can be developed on Macintosh, it can be developed on Windows XP or Windows 7. I'm not sure about Windows 8 yet. I haven't seen anybody trying to do development on Windows 8, although I'm sure that it will probably be supported because the Windows 8 for Intel should support the Java Development Kit. And Android depends upon the Java language and Java Development Kit being installed to support the software development kit. In the Android class, the object is about the same. It's intro to slightly advanced application development, right from the very beginning of installing the software development kits, software development environments, right on up to the production of an app. The final project for the class, for the Android and for the iOS class, both, is for the student to actually produce an app which you've learned how to build from your lessons in the class. And that would demonstrates that you've mastered the material that we've covered in the class. Both the Android and the iOS class are 8 weeks of instruction. The 8 weeks of instruction it's an online format. The material is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the lesson materials are released in 1 week increments, which means that usually on a Wednesday of each week, new material will be released for the succeeding week, for the next week coming up. And you'll have that week to do those assignments. Plus, the assignments are usually due actually 13 days after they've been assigned, so things are due the end of the second week after they've been assigned. So you essentially have 2 weeks to do some of the assignments. In the early part of the class, that's too much time. In the early part of the class, it won't take you 2 weeks to do it. In the latter part of the class, as we approach and go beyond the 8th week of the class, it will require more time. In each of the classes, the final project app is due no later than 8 weeks after the end of the class. So after the 8-week instructional period, you have an additional 8 weeks, up to additional 8 weeks, to complete the assignment by designing an installable app. And in both the iOS and the Android classes, the app should be installable, meaning you can not only run it on the simulator or the emulator, but actually install it on a piece of hardware and have it perform as a device. The Apple program allows you to have offers you membership, invites you membership into the Apple Developer Portal. And the membership gives you the same access as developers get to all of Apple's release materials. So not only do you have the course materials that we cover in class, but you have access to all of Apple's tutorials, their references, their sample code, and of course best practices, all the things that Apple has developed. The Google class isn't quite that structured or formal. Those information is available generally at developer.android.com. The Apple stuff is a little bit, the information is a little more curated from Apple's point of view, because Apple has its proprietary interest, where the Android operating system and the Android software development kit are offered as open source, developed by Google. Okay, do you have any questions so far?
So Tim, on the Android course, is it just developing applications and installing them on an Android device, or will we be able to learn how to integrate and extend, legacy type applications for the Android platform?
Well, give me an example. What kind of a legacy? Do you mean going from like 1.5 up to 4.1, going from the older operating system up to Jelly Bean, or are you talking about porting legacy Java applications?
Yeah, I mean, for instance, if you have a Java application and you want to extend that to the Android platform, right, so that your users can use their Android devices to access the application, things like that.
Yeah, the portability is covered generally, not specifically.
Okay.
Because what we're using Eclipse, which is a sort of a default development environment for Java anyway. And we're using the ADT plugins, so code that's written in Java should be pretty easily ported to the Android device. So I mean, you have to understand that you're in a mobile environment, but the actual code base is pretty similar.
Okay.
And we do go through that, but we don't emphasize, we have no concentration on porting. But you should, as you learn to use the Eclipse environment and how to compile the code for the Android device, you should be able to port applications, and that should be something you should be able to do.
Okay. Because, when I look at some of the applications, for instance, the Papa John's Pizza website, right? They have a website which has, a slightly advanced functionality. Then they have the Android version of their application, which is a scaled-down version, but you can still order what you need to order, right?
Right.
In terms of their products, and so I was just thinking, will we learn that, if you have an existing application and then, bringing a scaled-down version into the Android platform and being able to communicate back with the older application?
Well, we talk about communicating back to the original application.
Integrating back to the same database, that is,
That shouldn't be a problem. Database integration is no problem. Most of the time, what we end up with in differences in mobile apps and the full-blown app is two restrictions. One, of course, is restriction of the hardware, and the other one is with Android. You've got kind of a large target. You have to make your applications so that essentially now they'll run on 2.2 devices up to 4.1 devices.
Right.
And sometimes that limits what you can do in the mobile environment, because you're covering several releases, more than several. You're covering a bunch of releases of the software development kit.
Okay. And what about the design of the user interface? Are we covering that in the
Yes,
Android?
the design of the user interface is one of the things that we actually concentrate on.
Okay.
User interface design has actually become a specialty apart from mobile applications, because user interface design is very important as far as the intuitive nature of apps and how you can use them. That's covered pretty extensively, along with the actual coding of the different functions and the different things that you want to do. There are a lot of do's and don'ts in you should follow in the mobile field, and they're a little bit less as well defined for Android as they are with Apple. Apple's had its human interface guidelines for a long time, and they have a certain way of setting up their user interfaces, which has been very successful for them. With the Android, they don't quite have the history of that type of user interface design or engineering. It's coming, but it's not quite there yet. So there is a little bit more flexibility in designing user interface, especially when we're not exactly sure what is going to work the best. And once it's designed, the best thing to do is still hand it to beta testers and let other people, other pairs of eyes, look at the application to see if it's intuitive to them also. Okay.
And I think the only difference between the iOS and the Android course is that for iOS, you have to buy an Apple Macintosh or, you know, one of those machines, right, before you can actually start developing.
Yeah, that and a device. And the you need a Macintosh computer because there hasn't been an emulator that anyone's ever tried in class or that I've tried who can support the Xcode environment.
Right.
You need a device onto which to install your applications. And again, that also comes with a membership to the Apple developers. So there's sort of an integration between Apple's production commercially available resources for hardware, for development, Xcode, and the actual hardware you deploy onto the iOS devices themselves.
Okay.
You need Apple branded hardware for that course.
Okay. And both the courses are fully online, correct?
Yes, both courses are fully online. And the material is available all the time except for the last 4 weeks of each class. We're going to conduct live chat or conference sessions for an hour for one night a week. So we discuss live some of the issues that might be coming up or some of the features that people might want to add to their programs, because as we progress through the course, we get closer and closer to people coming up with an idea for an app, submitting to me a proposal for an app, going through it to make sure that it's something which can be done, which is doable. And then as people run into problems or think of new ways of implementing features, we discuss that live.
Okay.
Typically, that's 8:30 to 9:30 on Eastern Time on a Wednesday night and a Thursday night. That's what it's been in the past. That's what we anticipated being for this upcoming class too, for both classes. Wednesday for the Android and Thursday for the iPhone class is the latest schedule again.
Wednesday was for Android, you said?
Wednesday is Android, and 8:30 to 9:30 Eastern Time, and Thursday is for the iOS.
Okay. Yeah, I'm planning to, enroll in one of the other courses you have, the cloud computing piece.
Oh, right,
I just want to make sure that I don't clash with that course. I'm going to check on that.
Well, I believe the cloud computing is all in class, I think. Whereas this one is online, which means that it's it doesn't take away the amount of time you need to spend or the difficulty of the subject matter, but it does give you a little flexibility in scheduling, either between sitting in a classroom with instruction or the time that you can spend outside of the classroom doing in an online environment.
Okay.
All right, I've had another question here, and the other question is asking how is online learning done in this class? For a student who is new to the process and wondering if they would have a hard time. Now, online learning is, I wouldn't say online learning is more difficult than classroom learning, but it is entirely different. It's often said the best thing about online learning is you don't have to go to class. Well, sometimes the worst thing about online learning is that you don't have to go to class. There's a certain discipline in going into an environment where it's dedicated to a certain task, and that task may be the study of subject matter. But because as we get older and we have obligations, we go to work, we have other things we have to do, getting together in a classroom environment isn't always an option. It can be very difficult to do. And for those people, the online environment can be a viable option. In an online environment, you are somewhat isolated from the rest of your students. While we do have forums and we have the live chats where people can get together and actually discuss things, a lot of the work is done, it depends upon your self-motivation. When assignments are given, it's necessary to get them done. When you're in a classroom situation, sometimes the motivation to get them done is a little bit greater than if you're at home where other priorities can jump in between you and the work that's done. Whether or not someone would actually be successful in that really depends upon the level of dedication and whether or not you can work well independently. Now, while there probably is more direct support between the instructors and students in the online formats that we use, meaning that you can ask a question any time of the day and your question will generally be answered later that day or by the next day, or your discussion will be addressed, whereas in a classroom environment, if you have a Tuesday or Thursday class or a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, those types of questions and concerns may not be addressed until the next time you have a class. So there is a pretty immediate availability of instructors for questioning and discussion in the online environment. But the online environment does require a certain independence and motivation that sometimes the regular classroom environment doesn't require as much. Okay. And I think that answers that question. Do you have any other questions about the class, or how it's conducted, or when it is, how often it runs, what sort of award you get with the class? I can start with the award. The award is the successful student, which is the student that completes their final project for the class within the time limits of the total 16 weeks of the class, is awarded a certificate from NJIT. And we're also awarded, since this is a professional development non-credit class, you're awarded continuing education units as opposed to credits. Each of these classes carry the 3-credit award, 3 continuing education unit credit award, in addition to the actual certificate you get at the end of the class. Another question we got is, why should someone spend this much money in a class that you can take self-study for free? Well, that's more true in the Android case than it is in the iOS case, because Android, the materials are available. That's more true in the Android case than it is in the iOS case. Hold on a second. Android, the materials are available. That's more true in the Android case than it is in the iOS case. Hold on. Android, the materials are available. That's more true in the Android case than it is in the Okay, there we go. In an iOS environment, the materials are only available in the right through Apple themselves for their release materials. There are a lot of tutorials and stuff available online by independent people who produce independent work and independent instruction. Some of those are free. Some of those they do charge a fee for some of those courses. In the Android world, there also are paid courses that are available, but most of the information is available, is open source, and the information itself is based on an open source standard, and a lot of the information is open source and available to anyone. The difference is studying by yourself and studying in what is more of a curated environment, where we have taken the time to come up with structured lesson plans and structured classes, and each of the topics in the class, each of the sections in the class, from week 1, week 2, week 3, right on through week 8, each of those builds upon the prior section, so that there is a progression of learning that goes on in a structured environment. Like I said, there's motivated people can learn this on their own, and many have. There was, at the beginning of iOS even, there were a lot of developers, including me, that had no prior knowledge of the Apple tools. Some of the Apple tools didn't exist. Same thing with Android. When Android came out, there were people who were good with Java language, which is based on, and were able to jump into programming. I wouldn't say on a hit and miss or trial and error, but on a figure it out yourself basis, they were able to succeed with that. But if you're looking to enhance some skills, whether it's just for interest or whether you have a commercial intent, whether you want to enhance your resume or get a job which may also have mobile application requirements that you'll be able to write, the learning environment in a structured paid class it's probably a better environment than you can get than if you actually try and learn it on your own. Like, some people are motivated enough to be able to learn it on their own and do pretty well. That's originally how I started with this. But that's not the case for everyone. Everyone has a little bit different method and needs for learning. And compiling an online class the way we've done here has proven to be successful for a large number of people. The iOS classes now, we've trained about 300 people. The Android class, somewhat less than that, but it's been around not quite as long as the Apple class. Another question is, what programming skills do I need to take these classes? Well, programming skills, you need programming skills. You don't need a background in programming, which means that you need the aptitude to be able to learn some programming languages. The Android is based on Java, so you need to be able to learn the Java environment. iOS is based on a language called Objective-C, which is Apple's proprietary language. And you'll learn that as the class progresses. You'll learn it as you need to know it. We don't require prior Java knowledge or prior Objective-C knowledge to coming into this class. The resources that you're provided should be, well, they have been enough to get you through app development in this class. They're not enough to keep you going in app development if you proceed and seek a full-time programming employment, or even if you want to expand your own programming and app writing resume as you go along. The more that you learn, the more that you write a complex application, the more of the fundamental languages you'll need to know. But as far as coming into this class, you don't really need to know a programming language. What you need bringing into this class is dedication, interest, and the ability to learn a programming language. But that may be difficult to gauge at first coming into a class, but most people who are dedicated enough and diligent can learn that programming language without a tremendous amount of difficulty. I'm not saying not a tremendous amount of work, because both of these classes require quite a bit of work. Neither one of them, even though it's labeled as a non-credit class, neither one of these classes are particularly easy, nor are they designed to be. They're designed to teach a skill which will benefit you in your day-to-day life or in your professional life. So while we don't need professional programming skills coming into this class, or the knowledge of a professional programming language, what we're looking for is aptitude, and sometimes that aptitude is best judged by your own facility with your computer. If you're good with a Macintosh computer and you know what's going on, you'll probably be okay working in the Xcode environment with Objective-C. If you're good with your Windows computer, or if you're good in a Java development environment, or if you've used Eclipse before to do any kind of development on it, you'll probably be okay with the Android software development kit and the Eclipse environment with the ADT plugin. Well, I'm thinking about it, with the books that we use for the class. Okay. I can hold up here this book, where you can see it all right. This one is Professional Android 2 Application Development. It's because one of my students just borrowed my Professional Android 4 development book. It's the same book. It's available from Rocks Publishing, but it's updated for the 4.1 and for Jelly Bean. That's what we're using in the Android class right now. In the iPhone class, we're using the iOS 5 development book, beginning iOS 5 development, and that book is here. And the only reason that we're using the iOS 5 development book at this point is because its successor, the iOS 6 development book, is due out within the next couple of days. Whether or not it will ship in time for the class on January 23rd, we're not sure about that. In the iOS class, we also use these two books. It's Professional iPhone and iPad database application programming. And another one which is kind of interesting in that it relates to both Android and the iOS environment. This is building iPhone apps with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And right now there's an ongoing discussion as to whether or not using HTML5 will catch up and supersede with the actual mobile app development platform-specific languages. That seems to be a ways away, but by using something like this with the HTML5 and the style sheets and JavaScript available, you could write cross-platform apps between Android devices and iOS devices. There are some commercial things out there now that do that. There's a program, a suite of programs called PhoneGap, which allows some Java and JavaScript and Xcode implementations using Objective-C to actually share code, share interfaces, so that when you port them from device to device, you are dealing more with the actual user interface than you are with the back-end code on it. It's successful for some types of apps and not terribly successful for others, but we're sort of moving in that third-party cross-platform direction where training in iOS devices and training in Android devices will merge probably and come together with some of the new HTML5 standard. And another question asking about the Macintosh lab at NJIT. If there was availability there, if somebody should get stuck and had a problem. Well, the Mac lab here at NJIT, the one that is for me that I maintain, we have 21 workstations in that, and it's available on Fridays. Sometimes during the semester it's also available on Wednesdays. So the Macintosh lab is available, and the hardware is available, and it's updated to at least the minimum that you need. Sometimes we exceed that depending upon what applications are installed on computers. And if you're having a problem and with code, sometimes you won't be sure whether or not your problem is your code, or maybe there's something buggy with the device you're using it on. We offer the opportunity here for you to come in and work in a development environment on machines that don't have particular problems that they are able to develop apps on if you get stuck. And then I'm here for advice too during the day. Like I said, typically we do that on Fridays. One question someone may have is about how we handle the transition between software. We're kind of at the mercy of Apple because we don't exactly know when they're going to release software. And then when we want printed documentation, we're also at the mercy of the printing cycle, which is why the iOS book, iOS 6, came out in September, late September, early October. And the first professional book about development in the iOS 6 environment really hasn't been published yet. It will be in the next few days, but there is a 3 to 4 month turnaround time. Fortunately, the Apple, when they release a new part of their operating system, 6.0 or coming 7.0 at some point, the time they release, they also release their documentation. While they're writing the operating system, they're doing their own documentation. And the beta testers are also submitting bug reports, trouble reports, or questions. And I'm an Apple beta tester too, so I get to see some of that in the back end. So by the time that the software rolls out, it's ready for development in the new version. It gets noisy here sometimes. As the software moves from version to version, there's always a certain amount of drop-off in some of the legacy applications. the application that was written for iOS 2.0 may not work anymore in 3.0 because there are certain features which are no longer used in the new software development kit. Programming term for that is a deprecated version. Now, deprecated software does exist, and it exists in some of the example codes even directly downloadable from Apple, from the Apple developer. But you can, along with that, there are tutorials in a way to actually overcome those boundaries and use the new features that take the place of the older deprecated software. So that you can, even if you're using an older code base, update it and keep it going as an app which would be eligible for turning in as a final project app. And one of the things in app development that's happened now that the app development cycle has matured over a few years is updating an app. And sometimes the skill in updating an app and keeping an app up to date is a different skill than designing the app to begin with. It's one thing to go out and write a new app and do your beta testing and get it out there, and it's another thing to have to take that app and go back and find out what it has broken or what changes have been broken in it in the new software. So one of the more important skills, especially in app maintenance and at a commercial level, is the ability to rewrite or maintain or update apps so that they will function along with the later operating systems while maintaining compatibility with some of the older systems. One thing that we do in this class so that people have sort of a scope of work and a scope of resources beyond the class themselves is the classes are supported for the entire length of your project, 16 weeks. And beyond that, we extend the support availability of the class materials for up to 1 year. So that if you do something in the class now and you need to reference it 4 or 5 months from now, you still have access to that material. The membership in the Apple, for Apple and the Apple developer also lasts up to a calendar year. They are reset every January 10th. And the entire Apple development environment rolls over again. But you'll have, if you fall into that reset area, you can be renewed so that you'll have a full year of the resources. With the Android developer, as soon as the developers release code, it's available to you on Android's developer site. Some code is better than others. Sometimes the code isn't really well tested. Not because from a lack of interest in the testers, but because the Android target in hardware is very wide. So there's all sorts of going on hardware, from extremely good, well-built hardware, the stuff that's just made to sell at a low price and may not have support all the features necessary to make an app work across that spectrum of hardware. Sometimes can be difficult, and bugs can creep in that may not exist if you had a more homogeneous environment for programming. But that's basically what's happening now, is where Apple has its proprietary target and market for their own hardware, and Android as an open source operating system has become the choice of all the other smartphones out there. There still are some BlackBerry stuff out there, but development is really flagged for BlackBerry. But the Android, there are more devices to develop on for Android. But because of that, because the target is so wide, and there are so many devices, that sometimes establishing compatibility across that entire spectrum of hardware can be difficult, if not an impossible task. I had another question. It says that I'm aware that this class has been taking place now for a little while. It's actually this class was derived from a senior project class originally in January of 2009. So this is the 4th year of teaching this class, and we began teaching this non-credit class, not with the same material, but this class structure and this topic in May of 2009. So we're going on 4 years of teaching the iOS class. And the other question is, how can we be sure that we're teaching the most up-to-date materials? Well, we try to stay on top of everything as soon as it comes out. The materials that we can provide in the class online are the most recent materials that can come out with the that have been vetted by a certain standards base, whether or not they're we don't go out and throw out all kinds of alpha code in the alpha code in this class because it causes problems with people learning compatibility between versions and compatibility between devices, and sometimes alpha code just doesn't work right. In the Apple environment, we have Apple is constantly updating their materials and their stuff. When you get your membership in developer.apple.com, the iOS student immediately has access to the most up-to-date release versions of Apple software. The student developer does not have access to beta versions of development for obvious reasons. That beta versions can be kind of buggy, and for someone trying to learn a new topic, and if they're having a problem, it always becomes their skills, their programming and development skills are not to the point where they can determine whether or not they're making an application error in writing their code, or if there's something wrong with the software development kit that's being used, and something wrong with the actual So I guess to sum it up, we teach the absolute latest thing in the classes themselves. The books that we use can lag a little bit behind that because of the print cycle. But also, if you go back and take the earliest books that we used, which was the iOS Application Developer 3 up and the Android 2 up, the lessons even in those books can be applied right across the board for mobile devices on the lower operating systems, which means that they still teach the best practices for developing apps. They don't, because they're older, they don't have all the features that are available now, but the practices that are taught in those books are best standards of practices, and we maintain those right through the current environment, which is the latest release environment for both Android and for iOS. In case anyone doesn't know, since this is NJIT is a public university, but this is a fee-based class, the fees for the classes it's $1,050. That's for Android or for the iOS class, and that covers the 8 weeks of instruction, up to 8 weeks of your final project, and you'll have, if you take that out completely, extend that out completely, you have about another 9 months of access to the actual class materials. So it's $1,050, and it gives you access to the material for about a year. About 4 months of learning, of active learning, and then 8 months of reference. I'm aware that there are some people who haven't asked any questions. Do you have any questions, and can I assist you with something somehow? Okay, I've been asked, what is the typical class day like? Well, it's difficult to say typical because since it's an online class, everyone has their own agenda as for what can be done in the class itself. What I would say is what we're looking for is 3 hours spent with the material each week, okay, and then another 3 hours per 1 hour spent. So we're looking at about 9 hours of work each week, 3 hours of class material, 12 hours a week. So a typical class day would probably be about 2 hours spent on material. That's both reviewing the material and then that includes working on the projects. The first projects will probably go fairly quickly. We start with pretty simple projects and pretty simple examples. We move very quickly to more complex environments. So while the first week or so you may not be spending 2 hours a night, or an hour and a half, 2 hours a night, or you may find that in the 7th and 8th week and going on into the final project area, you might be spending more time than that. So there's no typical class day as far as the way it would relate to a classroom type class, but the amount of time that you may have to spend per day to succeed in this class should be 12 hours a week or so. Did that answer your question, or do you have, if you need me to explain that a little more, please feel free. Then that's when the next classes start. Okay. The next classes will start on January the 23rd. The Android class and the iOS class both start. The class materials are both released at 1 p.m. that day, which means if you register for the class, you'll get an enrollment into a learning management system that we use called Moodle. And prior to the class starting, you'll be enrolled directly into the class. At 1 o'clock on that day, the first week's class material becomes available to you at that point. And you have a week to cover that material. Any assignments and stuff that need to be done are due the week following that. So you essentially, the end of the second week is when the first week's assignments are due. The end of the third week is when the second week's assignments are due, right on up through the 8th week, when the final project, which is due within 8 weeks. We say that you have 8 weeks to finish the class and do your final project. That doesn't mean that you have to spend 8 weeks on your final project. What that means is you can't spend any more than 8 weeks on your project. So if you finish the class and you have your final project ready to go in a week, you can be finished with the class in as little as 9 weeks. What we've found typically, the typical student in this class, in both the iOS and the Android class, usually use 14 or 15 weeks. 14 to 15 for the typical certificate winning students, or certificate award students in the classes. Okay, I've also been asked how to register. Well, you can register by going to www.njit.edu/continuum, and if you scroll down on the right-hand side, you will see upcoming classes, an upcoming box which lists our upcoming programs. And in that box, you'll see both iOS and Android. iOS is also labeled as iPhone. We tend to use the names interchangeably because to the people who are more tuned into the technical end of things, they will know that iOS is iPhone, and that iPhone indicates iOS. The people who may just be coming into this area may think that the iPhone OS and iOS are different things. But we have the iPhone area there, and we have the Android developer. If you go to those links, there's a register link down at the bottom. You follow that link, and it takes you to the NJIT application process, which isn't as demanding as a process as if you were registering as a matriculating or as a credit student. There's an application process where you get some NJIT credentials. You're shown how to register for the class, how to pay for the class, and then you can register and pay for the class right then, and then you're notified. Once that's happened, you're notified when you're what the next steps are, which in our case are the creation of a learning management system account and then admission into the class itself. I've also been asked how much background in programming should I have to take this class. Well, we sort of talked about this a little bit earlier. As far as background in programming or programming skills, background in programming, we don't require any background in programming. An aptitude for programming is handy, which would fall under the sort of the rubric of programming skills, which means that you don't have to come in knowing anything. We do teach what you need to know for this class, and we make available to you the resources that can help you to learn the programming language as we go, along with the in-class lessons where we cover some of it. Basically, you don't want to try and learn an entire programming language and then start creating apps. You want to sort of do both at the same time. You want to learn what the design development process is, whether it's Android or if it's iOS, and how that process is integrated into code. Android, again, is largely Java. The Apple devices are largely just Xcode and Objective-C, which they're two completely different things, but the development environments for both the devices, the Eclipse development environment that Android uses and the Xcode development environment that the Apple products use, are very similar in look, feel, and how they do things. So the amount of programming that you need to get into this class is essentially none. But what you need is the aptitude to learn programming, the ability to learn, and a certain familiarity, facility with information technology topics. And I guess the way to put it would be you have to be good with a computer. If you're good with a Mac, you can do Xcode. If you're good generally with a computer and you like the inner goings on of personal computers, you would like. They asked if we need an iPhone or is an iPad sufficient. What we require for this class, and for the iOS class, is iPod Touch 4th generation, or iPhone 3GS, or iPhone 4, or iPhone 4S, or iPhone 5, or any iPad. The iPad we talked about before. An iPad will the earliest iPads, which I'm a proud owner of two, will no longer support iOS 6. They only support iOS 5. iPad 2, the new iPad, and the iPad mini all support iOS 6 and beyond. So while you can still program for the original iPad, I do it on it, going forward it might be better to have one of the newer iPads, but you can use an iPad, iPod Touch, or an iPhone for this class. Obviously, if you're doing SMS-based, text message-based, telephone-based type applications, you'd want a phone, but not everything requires a telephone. iPod Touch certainly doesn't, and the new iPads. And if you have one that runs iOS 5 or iOS 6, you can even use iMessage, which uses messaging without having text messaging without having any kind of a phone contract or a phone ability. Okay, and the comment was that one of the people in the meeting here doesn't have any device yet, but they're getting a new iPad. You're getting one of the new iPads that will serve you well in this class and probably for the next couple of years. Apple's release cycle seems to be that the hardware support begins to trail off after 2 years. Even though there still is hardware support for the original iPad, it's just that the software support, they're still supporting iOS 5 on the original iPad. It's just there's no support for iOS 6. And that's not simply because they've decided, when planned obsolescence, to get rid of the older iPads, but it's also because the new iOS 6 requires a certain hardware horsepower in terms of CPU, types of CPU, embedded RAM, and even local storage that the original iPads just don't have anymore. When are you getting your iPad? Soon enough for the class? Ah, and the answer is tomorrow. Excellent. That's that's soon enough for the class. We have about 2 weeks before class starts, so that gives you plenty of time to practice. And another question is, if this January class, if you can't make the January class, will there be another? Yes, there'll be another for both Android and iPhone. These classes run every 8 weeks. We actually run the class. There might be a week here or there difference between that 8-week that 8-week cycle over the winter holidays. And this year, of course, our local Hurricane Sandy actually stopped one entire cycle of the class. But apart from natural disaster and the winter holidays, the class runs every 8 weeks. The question was, the comment has been working in Visual Basic, and will that help me here? The actual language Visual Basic will not. It's different. But if you're working in the Visual Studio environment and you're familiar with an IDE, which is an integrated desktop environment, to do that type of development with it. And the IDE of Visual Studio, the IDE of Eclipse, and the IDE of Xcode are all very much the same. So whereas using a basic language may not directly help you, but being familiar with an integrated development environment will certainly help you. I said there are some differences between Xcode, Visual Studio, and Eclipse, but there are a lot more similarities and more differences. If you've worked in one, you can pretty easily transition over to the other. At least the tool that you use to do your development won't be an obstacle. The language is different, but the tools are very similar. And I've been asked how many students are in each class. We limit each class to 10 students. If we run over 10 students by 1 or 2, we might have a class of 11 or 12. If we go beyond that, we actually have a second section of students. A section of class to put students in, because in an online class we want enough students to engender discussion, but we don't want so many students in an online class that anyone gets lost. So we cut it off at 10. Like I said, it can go up by 1 or 2 if that's all we have. Any more than that, we actually spawn a separate section for the class. And the other thing we do is when we have our chats and conferences is if we have multiple sections of the class, they're all invited, so everyone can talk and share their experiences, ask their questions, and discuss what we're doing in developing our applications. The comment was intended to develop educational apps for iPads. Any thoughts? Wow. We're going to start with that one. Well, when you talk about educational apps, can you tell me a targeted range? We're talking K through 12, we're talking higher ed, K through 6. Do you have a target area for educational apps, or is it educational apps outside of school? That's a very, very big category. Okay, junior, senior, high. Okay. And then, of course, we have to divide that into the different subject areas, too. If you're teaching sciences, the humanities, foreign language, history. Okay. We'll do the Oregon Trail for the iPad. Of course, that would be a high school project, but I think you could probably whether you're in this class or you learned it outside this class. On a good starting project or a final project for this class would probably be a history type app where you can actually use maps, GPS, to show points around the world. You can even show periods and epochs when there are conflicts, whether it's Middle Ages or it's ancient Greece or Egypt, the Sumerians, depending upon your target area, or even in the United States, the history of the United States, by actually targeting areas using GPS, knowing the geography of where you're discussing it with, and you can integrate any kind of data into that, and also generate questions and answer banks if you wanted to put some sort of feedback or testing. And you can even, in the back end, track student progress, so that when students could submit homework through the application, or even if they didn't do that, if you wanted to be a little sneaky as an educator, you could be able to actually see how much time your students are spending on their work or in certain areas of the work, so you'll know what is interesting to students, what may be challenging to students, and what are some things that students may just not be willing to study. So there's a lot of possibilities in education, especially secondary school, high school. That's a very fertile field. Question: is it possible to meet me in person? Well, I'm not just on a computer screen. I'm an actual real person. Sure. If you can, let's see. I can't type this in here right now. Or can I? Maybe I can. I'm going to type my email address in it, and if you want to meet and discuss any of this, send me an email, and we'll see when we can set up a time to discuss whatever we need to discuss. Okay. You're able to see that email address, okay? Good, okay. Shoot me a note, and maybe we can put something together. I assume you're in the in North Jersey, Newark area. Okay. Okay, that's Sayreville's certainly close enough. Anything else you need to know? Good. Well, I look forward to it. I get a chance to talk about some educational application development. Okay, we've gone past a little bit past our 1 hour here, which is fine with me. And I think we're all set for today. I want to thank everyone for coming today. This will be available on YouTube in a little while if anybody wants to actually review anything that we talked about today. Okay. Thank you all for coming. We'll be doing this again next week from 1 to 2 p.m. on next Thursday also. Thank you.